Salutations, future Twig. Past Twig here once again, and we're back with another MTG deck tech for everybody. Today's deck is actually my longest named deck that I've ever had before, but one of my all-time favorite decks, and it is called I Got Reincarnated into Another World, and now some homeless man is telling me to krill myself. And I feel that this is very appropriate given what this deck is trying to do, as we'll get into it, so let's hop right on in. First off, I wanted to give a little bit of a shout out for the inspiration behind this deck, which is Yu-Gi-Oh! Nerd22 on YouTube. Thank you very much again for the wonderful inspiration there, Nerd. When he had texted me something about Bounty Agent, which is we've already talked about in the card call out about her, which I'll link it down in the description below, is a 2-mana 2/2 human soldier that when you sacrifice her, you can destroy target legendary permanent that's an artifact, creature, or enchantment, for example, targeting somebody's commander, and with this simple ability, making her an incredibly powerful political tool as well as peaceful removal for keeping other people's dangerous commanders off the board. However, of course, the downside is that when you tap her and sacrifice her, she's gone and she doesn't come back. While, as I mentioned in that card call that I featured her in, there were some ways around it, and one of the cards I happened to talk about was the commander of this deck, actually, which is Ultheim, Sigarian Outcast, which is a card that I always forget about because it was one of those very weird secret layer cards that came out with the Friends Forever clause, which is basically partner, but it's ultra specific and is only containing like 3 or 4 cards, and as such kind of limits the amount of possibilities you have. But I like Ultheim because he has such a unique ability, which is that you can choose target creature card in your graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn, and as long as you pay 2 mana and tap Ultheim, return that card from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And this was such a powerful and unique ability because I'm used to green-white usually being tokens, that it was nice to kind of see a commander that kind of went into the other thing that green-white occasionally will do, which is graveyard recursion on the same turn. And I was like, that's kind of cool. Let's see if we can build a deck around this kind of concept, using cards like Bounty Agent to get them out and get more value out of them repeatedly. Moving on, I then had a second light bulb moment, which was actually the Progenesis of this deck, which is that I ran across a card while I was looking up something else called Fecund Greenshell, which is a recent elemental turtle 5-mana 4/6 creature that as long as you control 10 or more lands, creatures you control get +2/+2, but more importantly, whenever Fecund Greenshell or another creature you control of toughness greater than its power enters, look at the top card of your library. If it is a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped, otherwise put it into your hand. And this immediately caused a light bulb moment because I remember that recently with Modern Horizons 3, they had kind of done an Eldrazi rework where originally what they had was a bunch of Eldrazi that created Eldrazi spawns, which for those who don't know are 1/1 little creatures that you can sacrifice them and get 1 colorless mana. Well, they've kind of redone that with Eldrazi spawn, which are now 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens. With sacrifice this creature, add colors to your mana pool. So they're 0/1 tokens, meaning that they will proc Fecund Greenshell. So I think there's room for a very powerful synergy here, since you're able to get a ton of tokens, generate a ton of mana, and those tokens coming into the battlefield can help you draw cards and get lands onto the battlefield directly with stuff like Fecund Greenshell. And thus this deck was born, so let's get right on into it, and I'll walk you guys through it. First off, of course, you're starting off with the early game. This is those first couple of turns where you're trying to set up your board, get prepared for the mid-game, and making sure that you have everything kind of established. And in that early game, we're kind of doing 3 main things. First off, we have cards like Cliffside Rescuer. I've been looking for a deck for this card, and I think this might be the one, where you want little abilities like Cliffside Rescuer, where you have these powerful sacrifice abilities that you can use, such as being able to give permanent you control protection. Second, you want to also be able to generate those Eldrazi tokens, as I mentioned, so we have stuff like Idol of the False Gods, because I will say right now this deck has a very significant amount of mana ramp and such in it, and mana burst. So having the ability to have activated abilities that can use up that mana, especially with our Eldrazi spawn creature tokens, very powerful. And last but not least, we also want payoff for creatures dying. So in particular, we're looking at stuff like alliance tags, such as Gala Greeters, the ability to, build up creatures, gain life, create more trapped tether tokens, and other things that as our creatures are dying and we're recurring them with Ultheim, we're able to get some value out of that additionally. Moving on, we get into the mid-game, and this is where a lot of our sacrifice outlets begin to come in. I will say that with this deck, I'm still having to fine-tune it. There's a lot of fine-tuning I feel like that this deck needs. It definitely needs a field test or two. I think I've got enough sack outlets in there, but we'll have to kind of wait and see. But I will say one of my more exciting sack outlets, because it's finally back under $1, is Fanatical Devotion, which is you can just sacrifice a creature at any time, and you can regenerate target creature. So you make a token, you can regenerate your commander, you can basically save your commander from dying and other stuff. Fantastic for 3 mana. Moving on, you want to continuously be making more and more Eldrazi spawn creature tokens. So of course we have stuff like Chittering Dispatcher, which is wonderful because it's myriad, so it creates a ton of itself. Then all those duplicate copies leave, and when they do, they leave behind little Eldrazi spawn creature tokens, so that hopefully we can proc off our other effects. And if nothing else, I love Eldrazi spawn creature tokens because they are guaranteed to be 1 mana, which means they are always useful for something, even if it's just sacrificing 2 of them, so you can activate Ultheim's ability at instant speed. Last but not least, and this is one of the very few cards in this deck that are over $1. It's about $1.20 currently. It's Jaheira, Friend of the Forest. I've always wanted to try out this card, and it feels a bit too powerful to use as a commander directly, so I thought it would be perfect in this kind of a deck where now our Eldrazi don't have to sacrifice themselves to make mana. They can also stay on the field and tap themselves for mana. And again, there's a lot of mana ramp in this deck, so I'm hoping to get out some big bursts of mana in the late game, and we can get some crazy stuff going on with that. And speaking of late game, we obviously want to have some powerful effects to help close out the game against our opponents. Ideally, our plan is to have a large board state, or alternatively have one or two powerful creatures on the field that we can protect using stuff like Cliffside Rescuer that give them protection. Sticking with the first of those game plans of having a wide board state, you want stuff like Anthem effects to help boost up all of your creatures. A big one I saw immediately was On Wings of Gold, which is fantastic because it gives all of our tokens +1/+1. They gain flying, and here's a kicker. The second ability of On Wings of Gold says that whenever one or more cards would be leave your graveyard, such as whenever our commander uses his activated ability to cause something to return to the battlefield, you create a 1/1 white zombie creature token, which, as you know with this card on the field, will instead be a 2/2 zombie creature token with flying. So getting a 2/2 flyer for the price of using our commander's ability already pays for that 2 mana activated commander cost, because you get a 2/2 with flying for 2, and then you also get your other creature back as well, so value train at the wazoo. Moving on, you also want to have burst-style abilities such as Return of the Wild Speaker. I love the versatility of this card because we don't run a whole lot of human creatures in this deck aside from our commander. So we do have some non-human creatures that we don't have a whole lot of +1/+1 counter synergies, but some of them do have 3 or 4 to 5 power, and obviously with that being the case, being able to draw 3 or 4 cards for 5 mana is definitely very solid. Additionally, having that instant speed ability to give all of our Eldrazi spawn creature tokens +3/+3 until end of turn, very powerful and a great way to close out the game in the final moments. Last but not least is something I like to call token upgrading, which is that we have Angelic Aspiration, another one of the cards I'm very excited to play in this deck. I didn't even realize this card existed, it is an Eldrazi Angel for 6 that's a 4/4 flying vigilance, and that when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of creatures, each with base power or toughness 1 or less, create that many 4/4 colorless Eldrazi Angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance. So obviously we do have a decent number of creatures in this deck that are 1/1 tokens. Of course, with Wings of Gold, theoretically that means that if we give them an Anthem that's permanent, they will of course no longer be 1/1 creatures. However, given the fact that we have a ton of Eldrazi spawn creature token generation, they're 0/1. So even with an Anthem, which we only have like 1 or 2 in the deck, they're only going to be like a 1/2 naturally. And so having Angelic Aberration with this case just allows us to take all those little tiny guys at the end of the game, turn them into 4/4 angel creatures with flying and vigilance, and just swing in for the win with a massive final strike. And for our basic game plan out of the way, I wanted to show off some of the cool cards that I'm excited to play in this deck. Truth be told, as you've already seen with the game plan, I've shown off quite a few of the ones that I'm very excited for, but there were a couple that didn't quite make the cut originally, so I wanted to talk about them now. First off, of course, we have Skyclave Apparition. I believe this saw a lot of play back in Standard when it was legal in Standard, and I will say I think it's going to be very powerful in this deck because he has an Enter the Battlefield effect of exiling a target non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with converted mana cost 4 or less. I think this is going to be quite powerful for removing commanders, artifacts, other things that could be dangerous to you or your team, and keeping your tokens alive. And because it's entered the battlefield effect, it's very easy to use him with sacrifice trigger and recur him using Oathheim. And while he does allow our opponents to create XX blue illusion creature tokens, usually XX is going to be like in the neighborhood of a 2/2 or a 3/3, and we have tokens that we can use to chump block. And additionally, usually going to be far less dangerous than whatever Skyclave is exiling permanently, which I love. Up next is, technically speaking, the most expensive card in our deck because Scryfall loves to consider this a 7 mana cost card, even though you can play each half independently. It's one of the newer cards, which is the Dazzling Theater Prop Room combo. In particular, I see playing this as Prop Room first, which allows us to untap each creature we control during each other player's untap step. Obviously, this is powerful because that's with our commander and with our tokens, and since there's multiple ways to turn our tokens into little mana rocks, there's a lot of potentiality with this card to just go out of hog wild and out of control very quickly because a lot of our deck depends on tapping itself. Additionally, Dazzling Theater is also useful because it gives our creature spells, some of which, as you've seen, are 6 or 7 mana, the ability to have Convoke. And what the Convoke means is that, again, we can tap down on our Eldrazi spawn creature tokens instead of sacrificing them, and they'll help pay for casting costs of cards and the like. Last but not least is a card I didn't even realize existed, but it seems really powerful for what it can do. It's very versatile, and that's Insidious Fungus, which is a 1 mana 1/2 creature fungus, which is already impressive for the cost, and it has the ability that you can pay 2 and sacrifice it, and you can choose to do one of the following, which of course you can destroy an artifact or destroy an enchantment. Fantastic removal. And in addition, there's the third option, which is that you can draw a card and then you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. Obviously, recurring this all the time means that you're paying 4 mana for each of these effects, but again, having that ability to consistently get this value train going, as well as just having it sit on the battlefield and just for 2 Eldrazi spawn creature tokens, being able to do all this stuff is fantastic because it is effectively a return to nature merged with an explore all on one creature, and it can be done at instant speed provided you have 2 open mana. A fantastic toolbox style card, and I think a very good fit in this deck. Last but not least, I want to get into the deck stats of this deck. As you can see, this deck is quite heavily skewed towards the early game, which makes a lot of sense because our commander does have an activated mana ability. So with that in mind, we want to make sure that we always have mana open to use our commander's activated ability, so as such, we want to have cheaper creatures for the majority of our deck. Moving on to the actual price of the deck, you can see it's about $35, which seems to be about my average. There's actually 1 or 2 cards in the sideboard right now, which I'm considering, where they're about $1 themselves, so it's probably close to $30 in total. But overall, I think it's a fun little deck. I'm going to definitely have to fine-tune this one and see if it's all going to synergize the way I want it to, but overall, I think it's a fantastic deck, and if nothing else, a very unique concept, because I don't think Selesnya Green-White gets a lot of Reanimator-style decks. Almost all of it's centered around +1/+1 counters, life gain, or tokens, so it's kind of cool to have something that kind of fits outside that deck, and we got to try out something new with that. And that is actually all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Deck Techs, and talk to you all next time. Take care, all.